I learned to read by the light of a lie. My master's daughter held the book between us like a secret. Her fingers, soft, unmarked by labor, would trace each letter as if teaching me was an act of rebellion, as if she cared. I believed her. That was my first mistake. My name is Samuel. I was born with no last name, no birthright, nothing but the value others placed on my body. In 1847, in the Virginia lowlands, I belonged to Richard Holloway, a man whose wealth came not from tobacco or cotton, but from something far more profitable. He sold educated slaves to the military. Officers needed clerks, quartermasters needed accountants. The machinery of war required men who could read supply manifests and calculate rations. And educated slaves, rare, valuable, controllable, they fetched triple the price of field hands. But no one told me that. Instead, they told me I was special. It began on a September morning when I was 15. The overseer pulled me from the cotton rows and brought me to the big house. My hands were still bleeding from the bowls. My back carried the memory of the whip from the week before. I'd paused to drink water without permission. Master Holloway stood on the veranda, watching me climb the steps like I was livestock being appraised. "This one," he said to his daughter, Catherine. "He's clever, wasted in the fields." Catherine was 17. Pale as porcelain, with hair the color of wheat before harvest. She looked at me the way you might look at a wounded bird, with pity that costs nothing. "Can he learn?" she asked. "That's for you to discover," her father replied. "Teach him letters, numbers, make him useful." I didn't understand then. I thought I was being given a gift. In truth, I was being processed. The lessons began in the library, a room I'd only ever entered to carry firewood. Shelves lined with books I couldn't name, a globe showing countries I'd never see, a window overlooking gardens I'd never walk through freely. Catherine sat across from me, a primer open between us. "This is A," she said, her voice patient, almost kind. "Repeat it." "A," I whispered. "Louder." "A." She smiled. It reached her eyes. I remember that. "Good. Now this one." Week after week, month after month, I learned. Not just letters, but words. Not just numbers, but arithmetic. She taught me grammar, syntax, the structure of sentences. I learned to write my own name, first time I'd ever seen it on paper. Samuel. It felt like becoming human. Between lessons, she would talk about books she'd read, about cities she wanted to visit, about how unjust she found the world, how she wished things were different, how she admired my intelligence. "You're not like the others," she once said. "You could be so much more." I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe her. Sometimes her hand would brush mine as we turned a page. Sometimes she'd laugh at something I said, a real laugh, unguarded. Sometimes I'd catch her watching me with an expression I couldn't name. I mistook kindness for care, attention for affection. I thought maybe, just maybe, I mattered to her. I should have noticed the visitors. Men in military uniforms would arrive at the house every few months. They'd walk through the property with Master Holloway, inspecting livestock, examining ledgers. Sometimes they'd ask to see the educated ones. Not never included in those inspections, not yet. But I heard the other slaves talk about Jacob, who'd been taught carpentry and sold to a fort in Florida. About Daniel, who'd learned medicine and disappeared one morning, chains around his wrists, headed west. "Master Holloway runs a school," one of the older slaves told me, "but graduation means goodbye." I didn't listen. I was special. Catherine cared about me. I was different. Pride makes you blind. By the time I turned 17, I could read Homer and calculate compound interest. I could write in cursive and recite poetry. I kept a journal,
a gift from Catherine, where I recorded my thoughts in careful script. I wrote about freedom, about hope, about a future where I might earn enough to buy my papers, about her. I never showed her those pages. Some dreams are too fragile to speak aloud. One evening, after a lesson on accounting, Catherine closed the ledger and looked at me differently. "Samuel," she said quietly, "do you ever think about what comes next?" "Next, miss?" I asked. "After your education is complete, what you'll do." My heart hammered. Was she asking if I'd stay? If I'd work in the house? "I'll do whatever Master Holloway asks," I said carefully. She frowned. "That's not what I meant." She stood and walked to the window. The sunset painted her in gold and amber. She looked like every dream I'd tried not to have. "I've spoken to Father about your future, about options." Options. The word hung between us like a promise. "What kind of options, miss?" I asked. She turned back to me, and in her eyes I saw something that might have been guilt, but I read it as sadness, as reluctance to see me go. "We'll discuss it soon," she said, "when the time is right." I left that room floating. I imagined impossible things. I imagined I might work as a paid clerk. I imagined I might live in town, visit on Sundays, see her in church. I imagined I might matter. 3 weeks later, the visitors came back. This time, they asked to see me.
They tested me in the dining room. 4 men in Union blue. Though the war hadn't started yet, the military was already expanding, already preparing. They sat around the mahogany table while I stood, a piece of livestock demonstrating its training. "Read this," one officer said, sliding a document toward me. It was a supply requisition form, complex, dense with numbers and military terminology. I read it aloud, perfectly, without hesitation. "Now calculate the total cost if each unit increases by 15%. I did the math in my head, wrote the answer on paper. Correct. "Write a letter," another ordered. "Formal request for ammunition resupply." I wrote it in 10 minutes. Proper format, professional language, flawless penmanship. They nodded to each other. One of them smiled. "He'll do," the ranking officer said to Master Holloway. "We'll take him next month." My blood went cold. Master Holloway shook hands with each officer. "Excellent. I trust the payment will be as discussed?" $1,200 as agreed. Premium price for premium goods. Premium goods. The words cut through me like a blade. Catherine stood in the doorway. I looked at her, desperate, searching for confusion, for surprise, for any sign that she didn't know. But her face showed only resignation. She'd always known. I found her in the garden that evening. She was cutting roses, placing them in a basket like nothing had changed. "Miss Catherine," I said, my voice shaking. "Those men, they said they're taking me." She didn't look up. "Yes?" "You knew?" "Yes." "How long?" The scissors paused. She set them down carefully, still not meeting my eyes. "From the beginning, Samuel." The world tilted. "Everything you taught me, it was to make me worth more. Father needed—" "Don't," my voice cracked. "Don't tell me what he needed. Tell me what you knew." Finally, she looked at me. Her eyes were dry. "I knew you were being prepared for sale. I knew you'd be sent to a military fort. I knew every lesson brought you closer to leaving. And you said nothing. What would you have had me say? That I refused to teach you? That I demanded Father keep you here, picking cotton until your back broke? You're a slave, Samuel. This was always going to be your fate. At least this way, you'll use your mind instead of destroying your body. At least this way, your father gets rich." She flinched. "Good. You made me believe—" I couldn't finish. The words were too pathetic. "Believe what?"
she asked softly. That I cared? I did care. I do. But caring doesn't change what you are. What I was. Not who. What? I trusted you, I whispered. That was your mistake, not mine, she said, picking up her scissors again. I told the other slaves that night. We gathered in the quarters after dark, speaking in hushed voices. It's true, old Marcus confirmed. Holloway's been doing this for years, teaches you just enough to be valuable, then sells you for 3 times what a field hand brings. How many? I asked. 8, maybe 9 before you. 9 men, educated and betrayed. 9 men sold like prize horses. What happens at the forts? I asked. Marcus's face darkened. You work hard. Officers treat you better than field masters, but you're still property, still beaten if you make mistakes, still nothing. And if the war comes? Everyone knew the war was coming. You could feel it in the air, in the angry speeches, in the way the white men talked about secession and honor. If war comes, Marcus said quietly, educated slaves become targets. Both sides will want to use you or kill you. I sat in the darkness, understanding finally settling over me like a burial shroud. Catherine's kindness had been a transaction. Her smiles had been training techniques. Every moment I'd treasured had been calculated to make me compliant, eager, grateful. I'd been groomed, not for love, for profit. I had 3 weeks before the officers returned. 3 weeks to decide who I wanted to be. I could accept my fate, go peacefully, become the clerk they'd paid for, live in whatever small comfort that role provided. I could run, try for the North, risk dogs, bullets, recapture. Or I could become something else entirely. The idea came slowly, born from rage and clarity. If they'd made me educated, I'd use that education. If they'd made me valuable, I'd become invaluable. And then, when the moment came, I'd turn every skill they'd given me into a weapon. But first, I needed to disappear. I spent those 3 weeks preparing. I stole paper and ink from the library, hiding them in the quarters. I memorized every word Catherine had taught me, every principle of accounting, every format of military correspondence. I observed Master Holloway's business dealings, learning his patterns, his contacts, his ledgers. And I made a decision that would seem impossible months before. I would let them take me. I would become the perfect soldier-slave. And then, when war came, and it would come, I would vanish into the chaos. I would learn war the way I'd learned letters. And one day, I would come back. The morning they came for me, Catherine brought me breakfast, a kindness she'd never shown before. I didn't touch it. You're angry, she said. I'm awake, I replied. She set the tray down, her movements careful. Samuel, I know you feel betrayed, but you don't know anything about what I feel. You're trying to what? Apologize? Explain? Ask forgiveness? Finally, I looked at her. You taught me words, Miss Catherine, but you never taught me which ones to use when someone makes you human just to sell you better. Her jaw tightened. I did what my father asked. You did more than that. You made me believe. That's worse than any whip. I never lied to you. You just never told the truth. The officers arrived at noon. They put me in a wagon with 3 other slaves from neighboring plantations, all educated, all bewildered. Master Holloway counted his money on the veranda. Catherine watched from a window. As the wagon pulled away, I took one last look at the house, at the library window where I'd learned to read, at the garden where I'd learned I was nothing. I memorized every detail. One day, I'd need to remember exactly how to find my way back.
They took us to Fort Monroe, Virginia, a stone fortress on the coast where the Chesapeake Bay met the Atlantic. Massive walls, armed soldiers, the smell of salt water and gunpowder. We were processed like cargo, stripped, inspected, assigned numbers. I was 47B. They didn't use our names. The quartermaster, a thin man named Lieutenant Dawes, looked us over with the satisfaction of someone who'd made a good purchase. "You'll work in requisitions," he told us, "recording supplies, calculating distributions, maintaining inventory logs. You'll sleep in the quarters behind the warehouse. You'll eat after the soldiers. You'll work from dawn until the work is done." He paused, studying each of us. "You are military property now. That means you're more valuable than field slaves, but also more watched. Run and you'll be shot. Steal and you'll be hanged. Fail in your duties and you'll be sold south to the sugar plantations. Is that understood?" We nodded. What else could we do? "One more thing," Dawes added. "Some of you might think your education makes you equal. It doesn't. You're tools, smart tools, but tools nonetheless. Remember that." They gave us uniforms, rough cotton trousers, brown and shapeless. We looked like soldiers at a distance. Up close, we wore no insignia, no rank, no humanity. The work began the next morning. The requisitions office was a cramped room filled with ledgers, invoices, and supply manifests. 6 of us worked there, hunched over desks, recording every crate of ammunition, every barrel of salt pork, every load of coal that came through the fort. The mathematics were complex. The penmanship had to be flawless. Mistakes could mean soldiers going without supplies and us facing punishment. I was good at it. Better than good. Within a week, I was handling the most complicated calculations. Within a month, Lieutenant Dawes relied on my accuracy more than anyone else's. "47B," he'd call, never Samuel. "Calculate the monthly coal requirement if we increase the garrison by 200 men. I'd give him the answer in minutes. "47B, check these manifests for discrepancies." I'd find errors the quartermaster himself had missed. I became indispensable. I hated it. Every calculation I performed helped the system that enslaved me. Every ledger I balanced made the military more efficient. I was a cog in a machine designed to perpetuate my own bondage. But I was also learning. I learned how supply chains worked. I learned which routes were vulnerable. I learned where weapons were stored, how guard shifts rotated, which officers were corrupt. I memorized everything, because I knew, the way you know winter is coming, that eventually the nation would tear itself apart, and when it did, chaos would create opportunities for men who understood how armies functioned. The other educated slaves and I formed a quiet brotherhood. We couldn't trust the field slaves. Many of them resented us for our easier work. We couldn't trust the soldiers. We were property to them. We only had each other. There was Marcus, different Marcus from the plantation, younger, taught music before being sold. There was Ruth, a woman who'd been a lady's maid and learned arithmetic managing household accounts. There was Thomas, who'd been a tutor to white children before his master died and the estate was liquidated. All of us had been lied to. All of us had been betrayed. We never spoke of escape openly, too dangerous, but in glances, in careful words, in shared understanding, we made a pact. When the moment came, when war finally exploded, we would not remain tools. We would become something else. 1859, 1860, 1861. The nation fractured slowly, then all at once.
John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, Lincoln's election, Southern states seceding one by one, soldiers talking in hushed, excited tones about honor and states' rights and defending their way of life. Their way of life, built on our backs. In April 1861, Fort Sumter fell. The war began. Fort Monroe stayed in Union hands, barely. We were suddenly on the front lines of a conflict we didn't choose, but couldn't escape. The fort filled with soldiers, white men from the North who claimed they were fighting for the Union, not for us, officers who insisted this wasn't about slavery, even as they worked us 16 hours a day to keep their army supplied. And with the war came something unexpected. Contraband. That's what they called escaped slaves who made it to Union lines. Not free, not refugees. Contraband. Property of war. Hundreds of them arrived at Fort Monroe, fleeing plantations, seeking protection. The Union Army didn't free them. They put them to work, building fortifications, loading ships, digging trenches. But they weren't property anymore, not legally. The rules had changed. I'd been at Fort Monroe for 3 years when the opportunity presented itself. The Union Army was planning a major offensive. Thousands of troops would deploy from our fort. Supply lines would stretch thin. Paperwork would multiply. Chaos would reign. Lieutenant Dawes needed someone to accompany a supply convoy to Richmond-adjacent territory, someone who could document every transfer, ensure nothing was stolen, maintain perfect records, someone he trusted. 47B, he said, you'll go with Captain Morrison, 2 weeks, maybe 3. You'll sleep in the supply wagon, stay with the convoy at all times. Understood? Yes, sir, I said. This was it. A chance to get close to Confederate territory, a chance to disappear into the chaos of war. I made my preparations carefully. I told Marcus what I was planning, not all of it, just enough. If I succeeded, he'd tell the others. If I failed, he'd forget I'd spoken. The night before the convoy left, I stole blank military documents from the office. I took a Union coat cot. I took maps. I memorized the route back to Holloway's plantation. It was 160 miles from where the convoy would pass. I'd walk every one of them. The convoy was attacked on the 3rd day. Confederate raiders, cavalry, fast and brutal. They hit us at dawn, coming out of the forest with guns and screaming. Union soldiers returned fire. Horses panicked. Wagons overturned. In the chaos, I ran, not toward safety, into the woods. Behind me, men were dying. The wagon I'd been sleeping in caught fire. I heard Captain Morrison shouting orders, heard gunfire, heard screaming. I kept running. When the sounds faded, I stopped, breathing hard, alone in the Virginia wilderness. I was wearing a stolen Union coat. I took forged papers identifying me as a free man. I had maps and survival skills learned from old Marcus back at Holloway's plantation. And I had 3 years of rage stored up like gunpowder. I walked southwest, towards home. I walked for 2 months. I stole food from farms. I hid from patrols, both Union and Confederate. I slept in barns, under bridges, in hollows between roots. I walked through a nation devouring itself, burning fields, abandoned homes, bodies left where they fell. Sometimes I passed other runaways, slaves fleeing north, whites fleeing south. We rarely spoke. Eye contact meant risk. I grew a beard, let my hair grow long, became someone unrecognizable, and every mile brought me closer to Richard Holloway. I reached the plantation in October 1862. 3 years since I'd left. 3 years of war had changed everything. The fields were partially fallow, not enough hands to work.
The slave quarters were half empty. Many had run when the war started. Others had been sold south when prices spiked. The big house looked the same. White columns, pristine veranda. I watched it from the tree line for 3 days, learning new patterns. Master Holloway had aged, moved slower, looked thinner. War had been hard on the plantation class. Catherine was still there, older, unmarried. She spent her days in the garden, reading, walking alone. They had no idea death was watching them. I waited for the right moment, planned carefully. This wasn't about rage anymore. This was about justice, and I had learned patience.
I lived in the woods for 2 weeks, watching. Not the excited watching of escape, the cold observation of a predator. I'd learned patience in the ledger room, discipline in the military warehouse. Now I used both. I learned that Master Holloway's business had declined. The war had disrupted his buyer network. Officers didn't need educated slaves when white men were dying by the thousands. His last graduation had been 18 months ago. 2 slaves sold to a Confederate quartermaster who paid half the usual price. I learned that Catherine took the same walk every evening, through the garden to the oak grove where we'd sometimes had lessons. She carried a book, always alone. I learned that most of the remaining slaves were elderly or children. The valuable ones had been sold or had fled. Only 12 people remained in the quarters. I learned the patrol schedules, which overseers had left to join the army, which ones remained, loyal to Holloway, or too old to fight. And I learned something I hadn't expected. Master Holloway was sick. I saw it in his movements, the way he coughed into handkerchiefs, the way he leaned on his walking stick, not for show, but from necessity. The man who'd sold me was dying. Good. I wanted him to die slowly. I started with small things. A chicken missing from the coop, tools moved from where they'd been left, a bucket overturned. Then larger disruptions. A fence section collapsed in the night, a storage shed found open, nothing stolen, but everything disturbed. Footprints in the garden, boot prints too large to belong to any of the remaining slaves. I was planting fear. Master Holloway increased the night watch. He questioned the slaves harshly, demanding to know who was stealing, who was sabotaging. They knew nothing. They were as confused as he was. Good. Then I left the first message. In the library, on his desk, I placed a ledger, one of the old ones from 1859, the year I was sold. I opened it to the page documenting the transaction. Samuel, male, age 17, educated, reading, writing, mathematics, sold to U.S. Army Quartermaster, Fort Monroe. Price, $1,200. Next to it, I placed a single word written in perfect script. Remember? I watched from outside the window as he found it the next morning. His face went white. She came to the oak grove at sunset, as she always did. I was waiting. Hello, Catherine. She spun around, the book falling from her hands. I stepped out from behind the tree, into the failing light. For a moment, she didn't recognize me. 3 years and a war had changed my face, the beard, the hardness in my eyes, the military coat I still wore. Then understanding dawned. Samuel? She whispered. You remember my name. I'm touched. You're dead. The report said the convoy was destroyed, that all personnel were lost. I moved closer. Reports lie, Catherine, just like people. She looked at me with something between fear and wonder. How did you survive? Escape? Find my way back? I smiled without warmth. You taught me well. Reading, writing, planning, calculating. All very useful skills for disappearing. Samuel, if Father finds you here, what will he do? Sell me again? I'm already dead, remember? She stared at me, and I watched her mind working. She'd always been clever. Now she was afraid. What do you want? She asked quietly. Justice. He didn't. Don't. My voice cut through the twilight. Don't tell me he didn't mean harm. Don't tell me he just doing business. Don't tell me any of the lies you told yourself to sleep at night. I'm not. You knew what he was doing. You participated. You smiled at me, taught me, made me trust you, all while I knew I was being prepared for sale like a prize pig. She flinched. I was 17. What was I supposed to do? Tell the truth. The words hung between us. I was a coward, she said finally, quietly. Is that what you want to hear? That I knew it was wrong and did nothing? That I let Father use me to make you compliant? It's a start. I thought about you, she said, after you left. I wondered if you were... She stopped. I'm sorry. I know that means nothing. You're right. It doesn't. I turned to leave. Samuel, she called. What are you going to do? I looked back at her, at the woman who'd taught me letters and betrayed me with every lesson. I'm going to finish my education. Over the next week, I made my presence known. I left items from the past in impossible places. My old journal, stolen from the library years ago, on Master Holloway's pillow. The pen Catherine had given me, placed on her breakfast tray. The primer we'd used for first lessons, left open in the parlor. Each item was a ghost of the past. Each placement was impossible to explain. The household began to unravel. The remaining slaves whispered about spirits, about vengeance from beyond, about the dead returning. The overseers became paranoid, jumping at shadows. Master Holloway stopped sleeping. I could see the lights burning in his study all night. He'd sit there with a pistol, staring at the door, waiting for something he couldn't name. Catherine stopped taking her evening walks. She stayed inside, curtains drawn. I was destroying them slowly, psychologically. Because beating them wouldn't be enough. Killing them would be too quick. I needed them to understand what it felt like to be powerless, to be afraid every moment, to not know if the next day would bring destruction. I needed them to feel what I felt. On the 10th night, I finally entered the slave quarters. They were expecting me. Word had spread. Someone was haunting the big house. Someone who knew the plantation secrets. I stood in the doorway of the communal room where 12 souls gathered after dark. You're Samuel, old Moses said. He'd been there when I was a boy. I am. You're supposed to be dead. I got better. A few nervous laughs. They were afraid, but curious. Why are you here? Sarah asked, a woman who'd raised 3 children in those quarters, only to have them sold away one by one. To settle accounts. By scaring them to death, Moses shook his head. That's slow work. I have time. We don't, Sarah said sharply. War's coming closer. Confederate deserters raiding farms, Union troops burning supplies. We're caught in the middle. Some of us want to run north, but Holloway won't let us leave, says we're his property till the day he dies. Then maybe, I said carefully, he should die sooner. Silence. You're talking about murder, Moses said. I'm talking about justice. Law don't see the difference, not for us. The law? I looked around at them. The law says you're property, that you have no rights, no humanity, no future. You want to trust the law? We want to survive, Sarah said. Then help me. Help you kill him? Help me destroy him. There's a difference. I laid it out for them over the next hour. Master Holloway's wealth came from his business dealings, not just the slave trade, but debts, loans, investments. He'd financed other plantations, loaned money to merchants, bought shares in shipping companies. All of it documented in ledgers, all of it in his study. I need those ledgers, I told them. I need to know who owes him, who he owes, what debts are outstanding, what investments exist. Why? Moses asked. Because you can't kill wealth with a knife. You kill it with paper. Catherine taught me that, though she didn't know it. In those lessons about accounting, she showed me how fortunes existed not in gold, but in records, in contracts and agreements and documented transactions. Destroy the records and the wealth becomes disputed, questionable, vulnerable. How does this help us? Sarah demanded. When Holloway dies, and he will die, the tuberculosis is in his lungs. Catherine inherits everything, unless there are disputes about what everything means, unless creditors come forward with conflicting claims, unless the estate becomes tangled in legal battles that could take years. I leaned forward. Years during which no one owns you. Years during which you could walk north and no one would have clear legal authority to stop you. Understanding dawned. You want...
She came to the oak grove alone, 3 nights after I'd last spoken to her. I watched her wait, book unopened in her lap, glancing at the shadows. She knew I was watching somewhere. After 20 minutes, she spoke to the darkness. I know you're there. I stepped out. We'd developed a pattern, predator and prey, but she'd stopped running. What do you want, Catherine? To talk. We've talked. No, you've accused. I've apologized. That's not conversation. She set the book aside. I need to understand something. What? Why you're doing this, why the games, the fear, the haunting. If you want revenge, there are faster ways. I sat down across from her, maintaining distance. What would you suggest? Burn the house? Murder your father in his sleep? Those are crimes, Catherine. This is education. Education? You taught me to read. Now I'm teaching your father what it feels like to be powerless. I studied her face. Does that offend you? It terrifies me. Good. She was quiet for a moment. The evening insects sang around us. You've changed, she said finally. 3 years of slavery will do that. I don't mean hardened. I mean, she struggled for words. You speak like you're reading from one of Father's business contracts, cold, calculated, like you've become what he made you. The observation stung because it was true. Maybe I have, I said. Maybe that's what survival requires. You become the tool they tried to make you. Then you use yourself against them. That sounds like a terrible way to live. It sounds like the only way left. She pulled her shawl tighter, though the night was warm. Samuel, Father is dying. The doctors say 6 months, maybe less. The tuberculosis has spread to both lungs. You don't need to destroy him. Time will do it for you. Time isn't justice. What is then? What will satisfy you? I considered the question honestly. What did I want? His death? I'd already have that soon. His suffering? He was already suffering. His wealth destroyed? That was in progress. What I really wanted was impossible. I wanted the last 3 years unmade. I wanted Catherine to have told the truth. I wanted to have never trusted, never hoped, never believed I could be anything but property. But you can't unmake the past. I want him to know, I said finally, before he dies. I want him to understand that every slave he educated and sold, we weren't just products, we were people.
and at least one of us came back. He knows you're alive. He knows someone is haunting us. But he doesn't know why I'm still here, why I haven't killed him already. I leaned forward. I'm going to tell him, and you're going to watch. Her eyes widened. Samuel, tomorrow night, bring him to the library, midnight. Tell him you found the ghost, that you'll prove it's not supernatural. Tell him whatever you need to. He'll bring weapons, guards. Let him. I'm not afraid of your father anymore, Catherine. I've survived worse than Richard Holloway. And if he shoots you, then you'll have to live with one more person's death on your conscience. I stood. Midnight, the library. Be there. I spent the next day preparing. Not weapons. I wasn't going to kill him. That would make me a murderer in the eyes of the law, and the law was the only thing keeping the remaining slaves from being sold south before Holloway died. Instead, I prepared documents. I'd spent weeks copying his ledgers. Now I organized them into a presentation, a business proposal really, the kind of thing Catherine had taught me to prepare. 3 stacks of paper. Stack 1. Records of every slave he'd educated and sold, with names, dates, prices. 9 men and women sold for a total of $11,400, reduced to transactions, to profit margins. Stack 2, his current debts, itemized, cross-referenced, undeniable. He owed $8,200 to various creditors, more than he could pay if they called the debt simultaneously. Stack 3, a simple contract, an agreement, a choice. I placed them in the library myself, entering through a window Anna had left unlocked. I set them on the desk where Catherine had once taught me letters. Then
She came to the Oak Grove alone, 3 nights after I'd last spoken to her. I watched her wait, book unopened in her lap, glancing at the shadows. She knew I was watching somewhere. After 20 minutes, she spoke to the darkness. I know you're there. I stepped out. We'd developed a pattern, predator and prey, but she'd stopped running. What do you want, Catherine? To talk. We've talked. No, you've accused. I've apologized. That's not conversation. She set the book aside. I need to understand something. What? Why you're doing this? Why the games, the fear, the haunting? If you want revenge, there are faster ways. I sat down across from her, maintaining distance. What would you suggest? Burn the house? Murder your father in his sleep? Those are crimes, Catherine. This is education. Education? You taught me to read. Now I'm teaching your father what it feels like to be powerless. I studied her face. Does that offend you? It terrifies me. Good. She was quiet for a moment. The evening insects sang around us. You've changed, she said finally. 3 years of slavery will do that. I don't mean hardened. I mean, she struggled for words. You speak like you're reading from one of Father's business contracts, cold, calculated, like you've become what he made you. The observation stung because it was true. Maybe I have, I said. Maybe that's what survival requires. You become the tool they tried to make you. Then you use yourself against them. That sounds like a terrible way to live. It sounds like the only way left. She pulled her shawl tighter, though the night was warm. Samuel, Father is dying. The doctors say 6 months, maybe less. The tuberculosis has spread to both lungs. You don't need to destroy him. Time will do it for you. Time isn't justice. What is then? What will satisfy you? I considered the question honestly. What did I want? His death? I'd already have that soon. His suffering? He was already suffering. His wealth destroyed? That was in progress. What I really wanted was impossible.
I wanted the last 3 years unmade. I wanted Catherine to have told the truth. I wanted to have never trusted, never hoped, never believed I could be anything but property. But you can't unmake the past. I want him to know, I said finally, before he dies. I want him to understand that every slave he educated and sold, we weren't just products, we were people, and at least one of us came back. He knows you're alive, he knows someone is haunting us. But he doesn't know why I'm still here, why I haven't killed him already. I leaned forward. I'm going to tell him, and you're going to watch. Her eyes widened. Samuel, tomorrow night, bring him to the library, midnight. Tell him you found the ghost, that you'll prove it's not supernatural. Tell him whatever you need to. He'll bring weapons, guards. Let him. I'm not afraid of your father anymore, Catherine. I've survived worse than Richard Holloway. And if he shoots you, then you'll have to live with one more person's death on your conscience. I stood. Midnight, the library. Be there. I spent the next day preparing. Not weapons. I wasn't going to kill him. That would make me a murderer in the eyes of the law, and the law was the only thing keeping the remaining slaves from being sold south before Holloway died. Instead, I prepared documents. I'd spent weeks copying his ledgers. Now I organized them into a presentation, a business proposal really, the kind of thing Catherine had taught me to prepare. 3 stacks of paper. Stack 1, records of every slave he'd educated and sold, with names, dates, prices. 9 men and women sold for a total of $11,400, reduced to transactions, to profit margins. Stack 2, his current debts, itemized, cross-referenced, undeniable. He owed $8,200 to various creditors, more than he could pay if they called the debt simultaneously. Stack 3, a simple contract, an agreement, a choice. I placed them in the library myself, entering through a window Anna had left unlocked. I set them on the desk where Catherine had once taught me letters. Then I waited in the shadows. They came at midnight exactly. Catherine entered first, carrying a candle. Master Holloway followed, leaning heavily.
I stayed hidden near the plantation for 1 more week, ensuring Holloway kept his word. He did. On the 3rd day, a lawyer from town arrived with proper documents, manumission papers for all 12 slaves, legally witnessed and filed with the county clerk. I watched from the woods as Moses, Sarah, Anna, and the others stood in the yard while the lawyer read the proclamation. By order and agreement with Richard Holloway, owner of Holloway Plantation, the following persons are hereby granted their freedom and released from bondage. Sarah collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Moses stood perfectly still, as if movement would break the spell. Anna, brave Anna, who'd risked everything, looked toward the tree line where she knew I was watching. I raised a hand in farewell. She nodded once. The lawyer gave them papers. You're free to go, but I'll warn you, the roads are dangerous. Confederate deserters, Union raiders, lawless men who don't care about papers. You'd be wise to travel in groups, stay hidden. We've been hidden our whole lives, Moses said. Time to walk in daylight. They left that afternoon, 12 souls walking north, carrying nothing but freedom papers and hope. I followed at a distance for 2 days, making sure they reached the main road safely. Then I let them go. My path led elsewhere. Before I left, she found me one final time. I was camped in an abandoned overseer's shack 3 miles from the plantation. She came alone, riding a mare, carrying a saddlebag. "How did you find me?" I asked. "Anna told me where you'd be before she left." Catherine dismounted. "I need to give you something. I don't want your money. It's not money. She opened the saddlebag and pulled out a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, my old journal, the one I'd written in during lessons, filled with thoughts I'd never shared. "You kept this?" I said, surprised. "I read it after you left. I know I shouldn't have, but—" She stopped. "You wrote about wanting to learn, about hoping for a future, about believing education would save you." I was naive. "You were human, and I helped destroy that." She set the journal in my hands. "You also wrote about wanting to teach others, about imagining a school where people like you could learn without fear." I stayed hidden near the plantation for 1 more week, ensuring Holloway kept his word. He did. On the 3rd day, a lawyer from town arrived with proper documents, manumission papers for all 12 slaves, legally witnessed and filed with the county clerk. I watched from the woods as Moses, Sarah, Anna, and the others stood in the yard while the lawyer read the proclamation. "By order and agreement with Richard Holloway, owner of Holloway Plantation, the following persons are hereby granted their freedom and released from bondage." Sarah collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Moses stood perfectly still, as if movement would break the spell. Anna, brave Anna, who'd risked everything, looked toward the tree line where she knew I was watching. I raised a hand in farewell. She nodded once. The lawyer gave them papers. "You're free to go, but I'll warn you, the roads are dangerous. Confederate deserters, Union raiders, lawless men who don't care about papers. You'd be wise to travel in groups. Stay hidden." "We've been hidden our whole lives," Moses said. "Time to walk in daylight." They left that afternoon, 12 souls walking north, carrying nothing but freedom papers and hope. I followed at a distance for 2 days, making sure they reached the main road safely. Then I let them go. My path led elsewhere. Before I left, she found me one final time. I was camped in an abandoned overseer's shack 3 miles from the plantation. She came alone, riding a mare, carrying a saddlebag. "How did you find me?" I asked. "Anna told me where you'd be before she left." Catherine dismounted. "I need to give you something. I don't want your money." "It's not money." She opened the saddlebag and pulled out a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, my old journal, the one I'd written in during lessons, filled with thoughts I'd never shared. "You kept this?" I said, surprised. "I read it after you left. I know I shouldn't have, but—" She stopped. "You wrote about wanting to learn, about hoping for a future, about believing education would save you." I was naive. "You were human, and I helped destroy that." She set the journal in my hands. "You also wrote about wanting to teach others, about imagining a school where people like you could learn without fear." I'd forgotten I'd written that. Dreams from another lifetime. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Father is dying, and when he does, the estate becomes mine. The land, the house, everything." She looked at me steadily. "I can't undo what he did, what I helped him do, but I can choose what happens next." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when this war ends, and it will end, there will be thousands of freed slaves who can't read, can't write, can't calculate. They'll need teachers." She paused. "You could be one of them." "You want me to come back to teach?" "I want to turn the plantation into a school for freedmen, use the library, the land, everything, but I'd need someone who understands what it means to learn under oppression, someone who survived it." I stared at her. "You're asking me to return to the place where I was enslaved, to work with you? I'm asking you to help me transform it, to make something good from all this evil." It was insane, impossible, and yet— "I'll think about it," I said finally. "After the war, if I survive." "If you survive," she echoed. "Samuel, where are you going?" "To fight. The 54th Massachusetts is accepting colored soldiers. I'm going to join them." "They're sending colored regiments into the worst battles. You know that, don't you?" "I know. And you could die. I could, but I'll die as a soldier, not a slave. There's a difference." She nodded slowly. "When you wrote in your journal about wanting to be free, did you imagine it would cost this much?" "No," I admitted. "I imagined freedom would feel like relief, like laying down a burden. And instead it feels like picking up a heavier one, but it's mine to carry. That's what matters." I walked for 6 weeks, Virginia to Maryland, Maryland to Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania to Massachusetts. I traveled at night mostly, avoided towns, ate whatever I could find or steal. The war had turned the countryside into a wasteland, burned farms, abandoned towns, refugees everywhere. I passed other colored people heading north. Some were families, some were alone. We'd exchange information in whispers, which roads were safe, which towns had sympathetic churches, where Union troops were stationed. One night I shared a campfire with an old man named Elijah. He'd escaped from a plantation in Georgia, walked for 3 months. "Where you headed?" "Boston, going to join the 54th Massachusetts." He nodded approval. "Heard they fight hard, heard they don't run." "You?" "Canada, got family there maybe. Been 20 years since I seen them." He poked the fire. "What made you want to fight? Most folks just want to be free and safe." "I am free. Now I want to make sure others can be too. That's a young man's thinking. You'll age fast in this war. I've already aged. Now I'm just catching up." He laughed, a sound like dry leaves. "You got that right." Boston, January 1863. I reached Boston in January 1863, 2 months after leaving Virginia. The 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment was forming, the first official colored regiment from the North. Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, a white officer from a wealthy abolitionist family, was in command. I joined a line of men outside the recruitment office. Dozens of us, all colored, all volunteers. Some were free-born Northerners. Some were escaped slaves like me. Some were educated. Most weren't. When my turn came, the recruiting officer looked me over. "Name?" "Samuel." I hesitated, then added, "Samuel Freeman." Freeman, not a slave name, not a master's name, my name. "Age?" 20. "Can you read?" "Yes, sir." He raised an eyebrow, passed me a newspaper. "Read this." I read a full paragraph, perfectly. "Write your name here." I signed in cursive, "Samuel Freeman." He studied the signature. "You're educated. Unusual. Unusual circumstances, sir. Can you do mathematics? We need clerks, not just soldiers. I can calculate supply chains, maintain requisition ledgers, and manage inventory distribution for military operations." He blinked. "Where did you learn that?" "Fort Monroe. I worked in the quartermaster's office." "As a slave?" "Yes, sir. And now I'm a freeman who wants to fight." He marked something on his form. "We'll start you as a private, but with your skills you'll likely be assigned to administrative duties." "No, sir." "No? I want to fight, not keep records. I've spent 3 years watching other men go to war while I counted supplies. This time I want to carry a rifle." He considered this. "You understand colored regiments are being sent into the hardest battles, that the Confederate Army doesn't take colored prisoners."
May 1863. The 54th Massachusetts received marching orders. We were shipping south to join the Union assault on Charleston, South Carolina. 600 colored soldiers, most of whom had never seen combat, heading toward one of the war's most fortified cities. The night before we left, the regiment gathered for a final formation. Colonel Shaw addressed us in the torchlight. "Tomorrow we march to prove what every man here already knows, that courage has no color, that freedom is worth dying for, that you are soldiers, not slaves." 600 voices responded, "Yes, sir." "The Confederate Army will not take you prisoner. They've declared that any colored soldier captured will be executed or re-enslaved. You know this.
Your families know this, and yet you volunteered anyway. Silence, heavy with understanding. That makes you the bravest men I've ever commanded, and I'm honored to lead you into battle. We boarded ships the next morning. Destination, South Carolina, the same state where so many of us had been enslaved. We were going home as an army. Our first combat came on James Island outside Charleston. We were ordered to conduct a raid on a Confederate supply depot. Simple mission: destroy supplies, capture prisoners, withdraw. But nothing about war is simple. We advanced at dawn, moved through marshland and pine forest. I was leading 3rd Squad, 9 men who trusted me because I seemed to know what I was doing. The truth was, I was terrified. Training couldn't prepare you for the sound of artillery, for the smell of gunpowder mixed with fierce sweat, for knowing that every step forward might be your last. We reached the depot, abandoned. The Confederates had been warned. "Fall back," Colonel Shaw ordered. "It's a trap." We ran. Behind us, Confederate infantry emerged from the tree line, hundreds of them. They opened fire. Men fell around me. Private Johnson, who joked that morning about writing his mother. Private Williams, who'd been a blacksmith in Philadelphia. Private Thomas, young Thomas, only 17, shot through the chest. I grabbed Thomas as he fell, tried to drag him, but he was already gone. "Leave him," Corporal Davis shouted. "We have to move." We fought our way back through the marsh, firing, retreating, reloading, firing again. The Confederates pursued, screaming that they'd give no quarter to Lincoln's apes. We made it back to Union lines, barely. We'd lost 42 men, our first real battle. I sat in the mud that night, uniform soaked with marsh water and blood, and understood finally what I'd volunteered for. Not glory, not revenge, just survival, one day at a time. 3 weeks later, a letter reached me through military post. Catherine's handwriting. I almost didn't open it. "Sergeant Freeman, I received your letter. Thank you for your honesty. Father died 2 weeks ago. The tuberculosis finally claimed him. His last words were about the slaves he'd freed. He called it the one decent act of his life. I don't know if that counts as redemption. Probably not. The estate is mine now. I've begun the process of converting it to a school. I've hired 2 teachers, both colored, both free-born from Philadelphia. They'll need help when you return. If you return. You asked to come back as an equal. I'm telling you, the school will be yours to run, not mine. I'll provide the land and funding, but the vision, the curriculum, the leadership, that belongs to the people who understand what education means when it's been denied. Moses visited last month. He's organizing other freed slaves in the county, helping them find work and housing. He says he'll help with the school if you approve. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know I'm trying to do better. Not to ease my conscience, but because you showed me what I should have seen all along. Come home safely. Catherine. I folded the letter carefully, tucked it in my jacket. Home. Strange word. Could that place ever be home? Maybe not, but maybe it could be something else, something new, if I survived. Fort Wagner, July 18th, 1963. The assault on Fort Wagner was suicide dressed as strategy. Fort Wagner was a Confederate fortress guarding Charleston Harbor, massive walls, heavy artillery, positioned on a narrow strip of beach with ocean on one side and marsh on the other. No flanking possible, no cover, just a frontal assault across open sand. We were ordered to lead the attack. 600 colored soldiers charging a fortress designed to kill thousands. Colonel Shaw gathered us before the assault. He looked exhausted, like he knew what was coming. Men of the 54th, they're sending us in first because they expect us to fail. They think colored soldiers will break and run." He paused. "Prove them wrong." We formed ranks on the beach as the sun set. Artillery pounded the fort, but Wagner's walls held. Smoke drifted across the sand. Colonel Shaw drew his sword, stood at the front of the regiment. "Forward, march!" We advanced into hell. Confederate artillery opened up when we were 500 yards out. Cannonballs tore through our ranks. Men disappeared in bursts of sand and blood. We kept marching. 400 yards, rifle fire now, mini-balls cutting through flesh, more men falling. "Close ranks," I shouted. "Keep formation." 300 yards, the regiment was being shredded, but we didn't break, didn't run. We were proving something, to ourselves, to the world. 200 yards, Colonel Shaw raised his sword high. "Forward, 54th!" We charged, screaming, running, firing as we advanced, crossing the killing ground between us and the fort. I saw Colonel Shaw reach the wall, saw him climb up, sword raised, shouting for us to follow. Then a volley of gunfire. He fell backward, disappearing into the mass of soldiers behind him. But we kept coming. I reached the wall, fired up at Confederate soldiers, felt bullets whip past my head, grabbed the wall and started climbing. Around me, others did the same. We were a wave of humanity crashing against stone, determined to break through or die trying. For 40 minutes we fought hand to hand on those walls. Bayonets, rifle butts, anything we could use. Then Confederate reinforcements arrived, fresh troops, artillery repositioned to fire directly into our position. "Fall back," someone shouted. "Retreat!" We ran back, dragging wounded, leaving dead. Of the 600 who'd charged, fewer than 300 walked away. I survived, somehow, but I was covered in other men's blood. The assault failed, Wagner held, but something else succeeded. News of the 54th's charge spread across the North. Newspapers called us heroes, said we'd fought as bravely as any white regiment, braver even. President Lincoln authorized the formation of more colored regiments. By war's end, there would be nearly 200,000 colored soldiers in Union uniforms. The 54th proved what we'd always known. We could fight. We could die for freedom. We were men. I was promoted to lieutenant after Wagner, one of the first colored officers in the Union Army. I led Company B through the rest of the Charleston campaign. We never took the city, but we broke the myth that we couldn't be soldiers. December 1863. Winter brought a lull in fighting. We established camp near Beaufort, South Carolina. I used the quiet to write letters, to Moses asking about the school plans, to Anna checking if she'd made it safely to Philadelphia, to Catherine explaining that I'd survive but would be different when I returned. One evening, a private brought me a visitor. "Lieutenant Freeman, there's a woman here to see you. She says she knew you before the war." My heart stopped. Catherine? But it wasn't Catherine. It was Sarah, the woman from Holloway's plantation, the one who'd lost 3 children to sail. She stood in the camp entrance, older than I remembered, carrying a bundle. "Samuel," she said uncertainly, "they told me Lieutenant Freeman was here. I prayed it was you." "Sarah," I embraced her carefully. "How did you find me?" "Moses told me you joined the 54th. I've been following the regiment's movements in the newspapers. When I heard you were in South Carolina," she trailed off, "I had to come." "Why?" She unwrapped the bundle. Inside, a small carved wooden horse, crude but carefully made. "My son, Jacob, the one Holloway sold when he was 8. He carved this for me before they took him." Her voice cracked. "I've carried it for 12 years, and now..." She handed me a letter.
Sherman's March,
1864. The war ground on, month after month of battles, sieges, death. The 54th was transferred to General Sherman's command for the march through Georgia and the Carolinas. We were part of the Great Burning, the deliberate destruction of the South's ability to wage war. We marched through my past. Towns I'd heard of, plantations I'd known, roads I'd traveled as property. Now I walked them as a soldier, carrying a rifle. The march was brutal, not just combat, but the systematic dismantling of everything the Confederacy had built on slave labor. We burned plantations, freed slaves, destroyed supply depots. Everywhere we went, enslaved people ran to our lines, thousands of them. They called it Jubilee, the moment of liberation. I saw families reunited after decades, old men weeping as they touched their freedom papers, children who'd never known anything but bondage suddenly told they were free. But I also saw the cost. Confederate guerrillas ambushed our columns, killed freed slaves who joined our march, left their bodies as warnings. I saw freed people starving because they had no food, no land, no way to survive freedom. I saw the brutality of war eating everyone, Union, Confederate, enslaved, free. In January 1865, another letter reached me. Lieutenant Freeman, the school is ready. We have 2 buildings converted, the old library and the overseer's house. 40 students enrolled, ages 8 to 60, all freed slaves learning to read. Catherine kept her word. She signed the land over to a board of trustees, all colored men from the community. She provides funding, but has no authority over operations. You were right, it had to be ours. We need you, Samuel, not just as a teacher, but as a symbol. You prove that education leads somewhere, that learning isn't just about survival, but about building futures. Come home when you can. Your war is almost over. Ours is just beginning. Moses. I read that letter in a burned-out plantation house in South Carolina. Outside, my company was resting after 3 days of hard marching. The war was almost over. Everyone knew it. The Confederacy was collapsing. Richmond would fall soon. Lee's army was surrounded. We'd won. But what came next? April 1865. We were in North Carolina when news came that Richmond had fallen. The Confederate capital conquered. Lee's army surrendering at Appomattox. The war was over. 600,000 dead, 4 million freed, a nation broken and rebuilding. We'd survived. I stood with my company, the men I'd led through countless battles, and tried to process what peace meant. "What now, Lieutenant?" Private Washington asked. He was 19, had lied about his age to enlist. "Now we go home," I said, "and we build." "Build what?" "Everything. Schools, churches, communities, futures." I looked at the faces around me. Some were scarred. All were changed. We proved we could fight. Now we prove we can create. June 1865, the 54th Massachusetts was mustered out in Boston. We marched through the city in formation. Citizens lined the streets cheering, colored and white together, celebrating our service. It felt surreal. 3 years ago, I'd been property. Now I was a veteran, a lieutenant, a man who'd fought for his country and earned respect. We stood in formation one last time. The regimental flag, torn by bullets, stained by blood, was retired. A general gave a speech about valor and sacrifice, about how we'd changed the nation. But what I remembered most was what Colonel Shaw had said before Wagner. Prove them wrong. We had. at the cost of hundreds of lives, countless wounds, and years of trauma. We'd proven we were men, soldiers, citizens. Now came the harder part, being free. I traveled south in July 1865, the same route I'd walked 2 years before, but everything had changed. Union troops occupied former Confederate cities. Freed slaves walked openly on roads they'd once been whipped for using. The South was a graveyard. Burned cities, destroyed infrastructure, an economy that had depended entirely on slavery now collapsed. But among the ruins, something was growing. Freedmen's schools, black churches, communities forming where plantations had stood. I saw hope in the rubble. When I reached the Holloway plantation, no, not Holloway anymore, Moses had written that they'd renamed it Freeman's School, I stopped at the edge of the property. The fields were being cultivated by paid workers, free men and women growing crops for themselves. The big house still stood, but it looked smaller somehow, less imposing. And in the yard, under the old oak tree where Catherine had once taught me, children sat in a circle. An older colored woman stood before them, teaching letters. I walked closer. She saw me, stopped mid-lesson. "Class, we have a visitor. This is Lieutenant Samuel Freeman, the man this school is named for." 40 pairs of eyes turned to me. "Who can tell Lieutenant Freeman what we've learned today?" the teacher asked. A girl, maybe 9 years old, stood. "We learned to spell freedom, sir. F-R-E-E-D-O-M." My throat tightened. "That's the most important word there is," I managed. "Can you write it?" She nodded eagerly, picked up chalk and wrote on the slate, "Freedom." "Beautiful," I whispered. "Perfect." Moses found me an hour later. We embraced like brothers. "You made it," he said, pulling back to look at me. "Heard you became a war hero." "I survived. That's different from hero." "Not to us," he gestured around. "Come, let me show you what we've built." We walked through the school. 2 buildings, 40 students, 3 teachers, a library stocked with primers and newspapers, desks made from old plantation lumber. We teach reading, writing, arithmetic, and history, but also practical skills, farming, carpentry, business. We're not just educating minds, we're preparing people for independence. "This is incredible." "It's a beginning." He stopped. "Sarah's here, and Anna, both teaching. They wanted to be part of this." My heart swelled. "And Catherine?" "She lives in town now, smaller house. She comes once a week to handle financial matters, the trust fund that pays our salaries, but she never interferes, never tries to run things. She asked about you, wanted to know if you'd come see her." "Maybe," I said, "eventually." "She's changed, Samuel, genuinely. The war broke something in her, or fixed something. I'm not sure which. It did that to all of us."
I started teaching the next week. It was harder than any battle. My students ranged from 8 to 70. Some had never held a pen. Some had been whipped for trying to learn. All carried trauma. But they came every day, eager, hungry for knowledge. I taught them letters the way Catherine had taught me, with patience and repetition. But I also taught them what she'd never taught me, that education was power they owned, not something granted by masters, but something inherent to their humanity. "Why do we learn to read?" I'd ask. "So we can read contracts," one student said. "So they can't cheat us," said another. "So we can write our own stories," said a third. All correct. One day, an elderly man named Isaiah raised his hand. "Lieutenant Freeman, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "You were educated before the war, before freedom. Did it hurt, knowing you could read but couldn't be free?"
The classroom went silent. Everyone wanted to hear my answer. Yes, I said honestly, it hurt terribly, because education showed me everything I couldn't have. Every book was a window to a world I'd never enter. Every calculation reminded me I was property, not a person. Then why teach us? Isaiah asked. Why give us that pain? Because knowledge is like a seed. It might hurt going in. Breaking through hard ground always does. But once it takes root, it grows into something stronger than any chain. I looked around the room. You're free now. That pain has purpose. You're not learning to serve masters. You're learning to govern yourselves. Isaiah nodded slowly. That's a good answer, sir. Teaching freedmen came with unexpected complications. Many former slaves didn't trust education. They'd seen masters use literacy to control them, reading them false contracts, keeping records that justified brutal punishment. Why would freedom be different? I understood their skepticism. It was mine, too, once. One afternoon, a group of parents confronted me outside the school. Our children come home talking about reading, about contracts and rights. You fill in their heads with ideas. Yes, I said calmly. Ideas get people killed, especially our people. So does ignorance. Which would you prefer? I'd prefer my son alive and simple than dead and educated. The other parents murmured agreement. I looked at Thomas, really looked at him. He was maybe 40, but he moved like he was 60. Decades of hard labor had broken his body. You know why your back hurts? I asked quietly. Work. Yes, but also because you couldn't read the contract your master wrote, couldn't calculate the hours you were owed, couldn't document the beatings. You survived, Thomas, but you survived powerless. His jaw tightened. Your son doesn't have to, I continued. He can learn to protect himself with knowledge, to negotiate from strength, to understand the laws that govern his life now. Or he can learn enough to make white folks angry and get himself lynched. That was the fear, the real one, and it was legitimate. White Southerners were already organizing. The Ku Klux Klan had formed. Freedmen who got uppity, who learned to read, who bought land, who voted, were being targeted. You're right, I admitted. Education is dangerous, but so is everything else about being free. We can't hide from danger. We can only prepare for it. Thomas considered this. You really believe that? I fought in the war because I believed it. Now I teach for the same reason. He nodded slowly. All right, but if something happens to my boy, then we'll fight together, like we should have been able to all along. She came to the school in August. I was teaching mathematics, basic addition, when she appeared in the doorway. She'd changed, thinner, hair pulled back simply, dressed in plain cotton, not silk. May I observe? She asked, and nodded. She sat in the back, watching as I taught 40 freed slaves the same lessons she'd once taught me. After class ended and the students filed out, we were alone. You're a better teacher than I was, she said. I had more reasons to be. She flinched, but didn't argue. Samuel, I know we need to talk about what happened, we don't need to talk about the past. It's done. But I need to apologize, properly, not in a letter, but... Samuel, I stopped her. I don't need your apology. I needed it 3 years ago. Now I need something else. What? I need to know if you understand, really understand why what you did was wrong. She was quiet for a long moment. I told myself I was being kind, that teaching you was better than leaving you in the fields, that my father's business was inevitable, and I was just making it bearable. She wiped her eyes. But kindness that serves cruelty isn't kindness, it's complicity.
Yes. I made you trust me so you'd be easier to sell. I weaponized affection. Her voice cracked. I cared about you, genuinely, but I cared about my comfort more, about not challenging my father, about maintaining my place in a system that destroyed people. She wiped her eyes. I can't undo it. I can't give you back those 3 years, but I can tell you I understand now, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to build something better than what we had. I studied her, looking for deception, finding only exhaustion. That's the best apology you could have given me, I said. Does that mean you forgive me? No, but it means I can work with you. There's a difference. She nodded. That's fair. The attack came in October. Night riders, can members, Confederate veterans, angry whites who couldn't accept that slaves were now free, rode onto the school property with torches and guns. They came for the buildings, for the teachers, for the symbol of freed slaves learning. We were ready. Not with violence, we couldn't win that fight, but with preparation. Moses had organized a watch system. When the riders appeared, we were warned. Students evacuated into the woods. Teachers hid the books and supplies. By the time the riders reached the school, it was empty. They burned it anyway. I watched from the tree line as the library, where Catherine had taught me, where I'd learned to dream, went up in flames. The overseer's house collapsed in a shower of sparks. 40 students' work, 3 teachers' dedication, Moses' vision, gone in an hour. The riders left, shouting that this was just the beginning, that we'd better remember our place, that education wouldn't save us from rope and fire. When dawn came, we emerged from hiding. The school was ash, but we were alive. What now? Anna asked, her face streaked with tears. Now we rebuild, I said. They'll just burn it again. Probably. So we'll rebuild again and again until they get tired of burning and we get tired of building, and then we'll see who's still standing. Moses put a hand on my shoulder. They want us to quit. I know. Are you going to let them win? No, and Jack-tified, hell no. Catherine arrived that afternoon with workers and materials. I heard what happened, she said. I brought lumber, nails, tools, and money to hire builders. We don't need charity, I said. It's not charity, it's compensation. She looked at the ruins. They burned my father's library, the place where he created his ugly business. Maybe it needed to burn. Easy to say when you're the one who lost everything. You're right. I'm sorry. She set down her things. What do you need? Students need somewhere to learn today. We can't wait for new buildings. The old slave quarters? No, my voice was sharp. We're not teaching free people in slave quarters. Find us something else, or we'll teach under the trees. She thought for a moment. The tobacco barn. It's large, mostly empty. Would that work? As long as it's not where people were enslaved. It's not. Then it'll do.
We moved classes into the tobacco barn the next day. It was crude, dirt floor, open walls, birds nesting in the rafters, but it had a roof and space for 40 people. Students brought what they could, slates salvaged from the ruins, charcoal for writing, a few books that had been stored elsewhere. On the first morning in our new school, I stood before the class and asked, "Who knows what happened to our buildings?" Every hand went up. "Who's afraid it will happen again?" Every hand stayed up. Good. Fear means you understand the stakes. I picked up a piece of charcoal. But fear doesn't stop us. Let me tell you why. I drew a single letter on a salvaged board. A. This letter, this simple shape, white men burned buildings to stop you from learning it. Why? A boy named Joseph raised his hand. Because reading gives us power? Yes, but what kind of power? Silence. The power to read contracts so you can't be cheated. The power to write your name so you exist in official records. The power to understand laws so you can defend your rights. I drew more letters. B, C, D. Every letter you learn is a weapon against the people who want you powerless. They know this. That's why they burn schools, because educated people can't be controlled as easily. I turned to face them. So here's my promise. For every school they burn, we'll build 2. For every book they destroy, we'll print 10. For every teacher they threaten, 3 more will volunteer. We will outlast them. We will out-teach them. We will win. The students applauded, not politely, furiously, like they were declaring war, which in a way we were. In November, I received a letter from the Freedmen's Bureau, a federal agency created to help former slaves transition to freedom. Lieutenant Freeman, your work in Virginia has come to our attention. The school you've established is a model for what Reconstruction should look like, led by freedmen, supported by allies, focused on practical skills and literacy. We'd like to offer you a position as Regional Education Coordinator. You would oversee freedmen's schools across Virginia and North Carolina, provide teacher training, distribute resources, and advocate for federal support. The salary is $800 annually, substantial for a colored man, though insufficient for the work required. The position would require travel, public speaking, and navigation of hostile communities. Are you interested? I showed the letter to Moses. You should take it, he said immediately. The school needs me. The school needs you to succeed, and you'll do more good coordinating 50 schools than teaching in one. What about here? Anna and Sarah are excellent teachers. I'll manage operations. Catherine handles funding. He smiled. We'll survive without you. The question is, can you leave? I looked around the tobacco barn, at the makeshift desks, at the students bent over slates practicing letters. This was my home now, my purpose. But Moses was right. One school wasn't enough. We needed hundreds, thousands. I'll take the position, I said, but I'm not leaving. I'm expanding. Before accepting the Bureau's offer, I needed to settle something. I found Catherine at her house in town. Small place, modest, nothing like the plantation mansion. She invited me in, offered tea. We sat in her parlor, a room that would have fit inside her old library. I'm taking a position with the Freedmen's Bureau, I told her. That's wonderful. You'll be brilliant at it. I need to know something first, about your father, about what he did. She waited. Did he ever regret it, really? Catherine considered the question. He regretted getting caught by you, regretted that his business ended. But regret the moral dimension? She shook her head. No. He died believing he'd done nothing wrong, that slavery was natural, that educating slaves for profit was just commerce. And you? When did you realize it was wrong? Honestly, not until you came back, not until I saw what we'd made you into, not the education, but the betrayal. She set down her tea. I'd convinced myself that kindness made it acceptable, that treating you well while preparing you for sale was somehow mercy. But when you returned, when you showed me those ledgers, when you made me see what we'd done, she paused. I realized I'd been lying to myself. Why? Because admitting the truth would have required changing everything, confronting father, giving up my comfortable life, risking social standing. She laughed bitterly. Cowardice, Samuel, plain cowardice. I nodded. At least you're honest now. Too late to matter. Maybe, maybe not. I stood to leave. The
The real school, when we build permanent structures, I want it named after someone. Not me, not your father. Someone who deserves it. Who? The 9 people he sold. I want their names engraved on the building, a permanent record that they existed, that they mattered, that they weren't just transactions. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Yes, perfect. I'll make sure it happens. And one more thing. I want you to write down what you told me about your role, your cowardice, your understanding, not for publication, for the school's records, so future students know the truth. You want me to document my guilt? I want you to document what complicity looks like, so the next generation can recognize it. She nodded slowly. I'll write it, all of it. Good. I reached the door, then turned back. Catherine, what you're doing now, the funding, the support, the staying out of the way, it doesn't erase the past, but it's not nothing. Remember that. Thank you, Samuel. I left her there, a woman trying to build redemption from ruins of privilege. I didn't forgive her, but I recognized the effort. Sometimes that has to be enough. 1 year later, 1866. I traveled across Virginia and North Carolina, establishing schools. 43 schools in 12 months, some in churches, some in barns, some under trees, each one staffed by freedmen who'd learned to read and now taught others. The work was exhausting. I faced threats, burned buildings, hostile communities, but the schools kept opening. In May 1866, I returned to Freeman's School for its dedication ceremony. The new building was complete, solid brick, built to last, large enough for 100 students, a library, classrooms, even dormitories for students who traveled from far away. Above the entrance, carved in stone, 9 names. Samuel Freeman, Jacob Turner, Daniel Washington, Marcus Johnson, Ruth Harrison, Thomas Bennett, Eliza Moore, Isaac Cooper, Sarah Williams. The 9 who'd been educated and sold. I stood before that stone, reading those names, and felt something break open inside me. They were remembered. They mattered. Moses stood beside me. You did it, Samuel. You turned revenge into something lasting. We did it, I corrected. All of us. The dedication ceremony began at noon. 200 people gathered, students, teachers, freedmen from across the county, even a few Union officers who'd heard about the school. Catherine attended, but stood in the back, silent. I gave the opening speech. This building stands on land where people were enslaved, where they were bought, sold, used, broken, where I was educated not for my benefit, but for someone else's profit. I paused, looking at the faces before me. But today, this land means something different. Today, it's proof that we can take the worst of our history and transform it, that education, real education, given freely and used wisely, can break chains that iron never could. I gestured to the carved names. These 9 people never got to see freedom, never got to choose their own paths, but their names will teach generations. Every student who enters this building will know someone paid for your opportunity. Honor it, use it, build with it. The crowd erupted in applause. After my speech, we invited students to share what education meant to them. Isaiah, the elderly man who'd questioned me in class, spoke first. I'm 73